Welcome to the latest JNF webinar. Very much appreciate all of you joining us. Of course, before we start and introduce our special guest, I think I speak on behalf of all that our collective prayers and thoughts remain with our friends, our family, and of course all of Israel during these incredibly difficult times. Our deepest appreciation to our defense forces, all those frontline personnel and everyday citizens for all that they are doing to ensure the safety and security of our homeland. So too, and one can never forget, our prayers and our thoughts remain with those hostages still held in Gaza. This evening, here we sit in Australia and we watch from afar. We retire, from everyone I've spoken to each evening with our hearts heavy, as they have been really from October 7. We wonder as we lie there what might transpire overnight. And so too, I think we awake in the morning, fortunate that we have mostly had a mostly undisturbed night. We grab our phones or whatever device to try and understand what has happened over the last hours. And this has been our reality, I think, certainly for so long now, but certainly in the last week. But I guess with all the masses of constant information that we consume, whether we're consuming this and watching on traditional media or on our socials, we try to understand, and how do we know what is factual, what is pure fiction, and even what I've seen over the last couple of days, what is AI generated. Well, to assist us with navigating through this massive information is our special guest tonight, Maayan Hoffman, to share her deep insights, as we said, beyond the headlines, really helping us to better understand this ever-changing landscape. A very, very quick overview of Maayan and her background. Maayan is the editor-in-chief of ILTV News, Israel News. It's an independent English language media company. She's the former news editor and deputy CEO of strategy and innovation for the Jerusalem Post, and she has held senior journalism positions throughout the Jewish world, and her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Post, and many others, which I won't go through. Maayan, we are so appreciative of your time, and of course we all understand that should there be a need for disruption to this or discontinuation of the call, of course, this is the reality that we are living in, and certainly you are living in. Maayan will share her thoughts for the next 20 minutes or so. And if you do have any questions, please place them in the chat. I will endeavor to address as many of these questions with Maayan as possible, but sincere apologies if we simply don't have time to get through all of the questions. Maayan, I hand it over to you to please take us beyond the headlines.
Doron, thank you so much for hosting me today. I really appreciate it. I had hoped to be there, as we know, in person in Australia. And of course, all of this started the night before my flight was supposed to take off to Australia. And since then, it's been sort of nonstop over here in Israel. So just to kind of give you an overview of where we are right now, just the numbers. So there's been more than 400 ballistic missiles launched from Iran at Israel, obviously in response to our attacks. We, on the overnight, Thursday night to Friday, Israel did a first preventive strike against Iran, which has continued daily. Very strategic strikes against the nuclear sites, against military infrastructure, including many of the additional ballistic missiles that have not yet been used against us, as well as key scientists and military figures. They've managed to get through about 35 missiles into what we call impact sites. That means that they've actually struck down here in Israel. 24 people have been killed and nearly 700, more than 647 people, they're saying this morning, injured, and that number continues to grow. Those injuries range from critical injuries, of course, to more mild injuries, people suffering from anxiety, etc. In addition to that, we have more than 200,000 Israelis who are stranded outside the country, meaning that we have shut our airspace This is new. We've shut Ben Gurion before. I have a health science background. I covered the COVID pandemic, and there were many times when we shut down Ben Gurion Airport or we didn't allow foreign flights to come in. But to close the entire airspace, meaning no flights coming in and out, that hasn't happened before in the recent years, certainly in the last 5 years, to completely shut it down for more than an hour or so while we were dealing with that specific attack. We just had our first plane actually land this morning. It was a rescue plane, an El Al plane, that brought a small group of Israelis, a couple of hundred, back to the country, but everybody else is trying to get back, and that will take probably a few weeks, they're saying. In addition, people can't get out. So just like I wasn't able to come to Australia, many others are stranded here. We do have some land crossings. People are going through Jordan or Egypt. And believe it or not, there are people chartering boats and going across to Cyprus and then flying out from there. But by and large, people are quote unquote stuck in the country or stuck out of the country during this time. I have to say I'm very grateful. I was really ready to get on that plane to go to Australia, but I am very glad that I'm here in the country. I don't think I could have left my children. It's very tense right now. And more than that, not more than that, equally to that in some ways, maybe not even equal, but is the fact that I'm a journalist and my job is to be here and to be working with my news team. So the missiles have been coming pretty much nonstop since Friday night. And these are different missiles. So I've been living in Israel in various capacities since about 2000. And I lived through the second Intifada. I was a breaking news editor at the Jerusalem Post during that time. Obviously, we've been experiencing Hamas rockets since 2007 in various capacities, even more, in the beginning of this war, the attack on October 7th, Hezbollah rockets, and many other different kinds of attacks. But this ballistic missiles are different than all of those other missiles. They have massive warheads. They're packed with explosives. And they, when one strikes down, I mentioned the 35 impact sites, it is blocks of destruction, not just buildings of destruction. And if you are not in a safe room, when that missile hits nearby you, you are dead. There were even 3 people who were killed in their safe room because there was a direct strike by the missile in a home in Petah Tikva, and they were killed. These are very dangerous missiles. So if before, again, as I said, I've been covering Israel for a very long time. I drive to the north and the south and all over, and I've never actually felt scared. I would say that this is a very different war. And I am scared. I'm not terrified, but I'm scared. And I know that I need to follow the home front command instructions. My children have to follow them. And when a rocket is incoming, I go immediately to a shelter. Not that I didn't shelter before, but I definitely didn't feel the stress of a Houthi rocket like I do today. It is a different situation. Last night, we had a very small barrage. In the beginning, they were sending 200 rockets at a time and then 100 rockets. And the last few times have been 10 or 20. It's unclear whether it's because the stockpile is going down or they really do want that ceasefire that everyone's talking about, or whether they're saving it to use them more strategically at some later point, or they're just trying to send them more often, but fewer so that they can annoy us more. Either way, last night I was sleeping in the center of the country. I live in Jerusalem, but I was in Ramat HaSharon, and the entire our room where we're sleeping was a safe room. The entire apartment shook. And I jumped up and it's intense. It's very intense. The other day, I went to go visit Sheba Medical Center to go to the underground facility after a night of many casualties. And when I was driving home on Highway 1, the main thoroughfare, the sirens went off, and I had to think to myself in that split second, should I pull over on the side of the road? I see some people are doing that and going in the open fields. But then I thought, well, then if that missile falls in the open fields, I'm not really going to be safe. Maybe if I drive really fast, then I'll beat the siren and the rocket won't come toward me. I ended up staying and driving, and I was, of course, thank God, fine. But it was something, I was on the phone with my friend who was in her safe room. And I said to her, I'm very nervous. At least if something happens, you'll know that it happens because you're talking to me on the phone. So it is really difficult here right now. We thought that after October 7th, and we haven't ever seen destruction in this country. And, people compare it to the Holocaust just in terms of what happened that day. And I'd been there many, many times very shortly after that moment. And it really was and is one of the most devastating situations that could have possibly happened to Israel. this is yet another situation we didn't expect. So why now? I mean, I think people ask that, like, we've been talking about Iranian nuclear proliferation for as long as I've been a journalist, which is close to 30 years, and even probably before. In the 1990s, I remember being in college, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in his first term in 1996, and he was already speaking about not allowing Iran to get a nuclear weapon back then. So what changed? So I think there are what I would say are about 5 different entities that made us going ahead and carrying out this strike relevant today. One of them is that Iran actually has progressed and is close, if not already basically there, in producing a nuclear weapon. The IAEA report, the watchdog organization from the United Nations that is supposed to be checking up on Iran, came out with a report about a week ago that said, yes, they've actually done some clandestine tests. They're ready to enrich uranium, and we need to crack down on this immediately, or they are going to be able to move forward. Simultaneously, of course, there's the ballistic missiles that I just described. Iran has thousands of them, but they were ready to have tens of thousands more with deals they had signed with China and Russia. And as I described that destruction, imagine if instead of having 400 ballistic missiles being shot at us, we had 4,000 ballistic missiles being shot at us over the last few days. There was also incredible work that was done by Israel in April and October. If you remember, as part of this war, Iran shot some missiles at Israel. It was very calculated. It was meant to send a message. So we were able, with all of our neighbors and all of our technology, the aero system, to stop those missiles. But we did have retaliatory strikes. And in our strikes, from what military officials say, we were able to take out the majority of the air defenses in Iran, leaving it much easier for us to carry out the strikes that we're carrying out today. Meanwhile, although we have not won the war yet that we set out to, we set 3 goals after October 7th. And as I'm sure you remember, one of them was to completely destroy Hamas, both politically and militarily. And the other one was to bring the hostages home. The third goal was to ensure the safety, that Hamas would never be a threat to the residents of southern Israel. We haven't accomplished any of those goals, but we have done a tremendous job militarily and tactfully, and we are starting now to see the fruits of those labors. So let's take us up to the north, to Lebanon. Hezbollah was one of the strongest proxies of Iran. Hezbollah is by and large decimated, certainly not strong enough to be carrying out any real attacks against us at this time. Although Hamas still does effectively rule the Gaza Strip, Hamas is tremendously weakened inside the Gaza Strip, and therefore is not really an active proxy. We've done some work with the Houthis, Syria, not our doing, but certainly partly a result of the weakened proxies. The regime fell, and so we are in a much different place in order to be able to carry that out. The fear of Iran using its proxies is much less. In addition to that, Donald Trump is back in office. It's not a matter of love him, hate him, good for Israel, not good for Israel. That's for each individual to decide. But in terms of, what was going on with the administration there and the administration here, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Joe Biden had a little bit more daylight between the two of them. America was withholding or delaying some of the weapons and was very opposed to an Israeli strike against Iran. Trump, although also wants a diplomatic solution, stressed very strongly that he would prefer a diplomatic solution, was much more open to the idea that no matter what, Iran could not obtain a nuclear weapon, and has given Israel the leeway, or the support, I should say, to attack. We'll talk American involvement too. And then the last piece is that Netanyahu himself needed to do this now or never. We are going to have elections in 18 months. Love or hate the government, it is the government today, but in 18 months, we will have elections regardless of the situation in the country, because we are a democratic country, which means that, of course, when it is time for elections, whether if they're not early, they will be on time. And Netanyahu may or may not run, but he's been in office most of the last 16 years. And certainly, I think people are looking for change. And I think Netanyahu wants to leave a legacy. Iran, he said even comments where it was almost messianic, that he believed he was put into office in order to stop Iran from being a threat to Israel. And now is his chance to do it. So where does this take us today? Today, the big headlines of the day are whether or not the United States will help us. Israel has done already tremendous work in Iran at various nuclear facilities. Remember, this isn't Syria, this isn't Iraq, where we've taken out the nuclear reactors. Iran's program is much more geographically dispersed. It's deeper underground. They work with centrifuges. And a lot of it has to do with the knowledge of being able to produce a nuclear weapon, which we now know Iran has. We've taken out 14 of the key nuclear scientists. We don't know how deep the knowledge goes and how many more might need to be taken out. But Fordo nuclear plant is a plant that is about 300 feet underground, if I remember correctly. And that is a facility that we would need a bunker buster. We don't even have the ability to get that bunker buster over to attack Fordo. And we would need US help if we wanted to carry out a direct military strike and be able to destroy the Fordo facility. Everybody knows that. There's a question mark as to whether or not America would get involved. Up until now, Trump has said America and Secretary of State Marco Rubio both have said very, very strongly that America will not get involved. But comments made on Truth Social overnight and in certain interviews are starting to indicate that America might be changing its tune. There was an open letter published by U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, last night by the White House, which talked about how Trump is in the right place at the right time and needs to make a decision about what America is going to do. By the White House publishing that letter, it indicates that perhaps he is, in fact, considering using that technology, those weapons. However, Israel has said that it also knows how to attack Fordo. Well, whether or not that will be by multiple attacks, of smaller bombs, or whether that is something else, we obviously don't know. But keep in mind, what is amazing about Israel is our ingenuity and our creativity. I just want to take you back to the incredible beeper attack, we called it, against Hezbollah. Who knows what we have up our sleeve? And Israel says, Ron Dermer gave an interview, our strategic affairs minister, for the first time yesterday, and he said Israel is getting closer and closer to achieving its goals. And what are our goals? I mean, the idea could be, we don't know for sure, right? But the idea could be, number one, that we will set back Iran so much in their nuclear program that now the US can sign a deal. The deal will be better and it will ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. Or it could be actually destroying the entire nuclear program so that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. But we definitely know that the end goal, the large goal, is, whatever the details look like, is that Iran will no longer be an existential threat, not only to the state of Israel, but also to the entire world. This is a rogue regime that has brought terror to the region. I want to remind you, Iran has attacked Americans, had tried to assassinate the potential president. And so we in Israel feel that this is a job that has to be done, obviously, again, for ourselves. That is our core mission, but also for the rest of Western society. And the last thing that I will say, and then I think we should open it up to any questions that you have, and I'm happy to answer anything that I know, is that, Israel, even though I described how terrifying these ballistic missiles are and how difficult it is to be running to the shelter. I have a piece coming out today at 3:00 talking about the impact of lack of sleep on society, which all of us are experiencing. I interviewed someone this morning about PTSD, another young woman whose entire apartment was destroyed in the Tel Aviv rocket attack, missile attack. There's incredible tension. On the other hand, as you saw, there was a lot of divide coming back in terms of the Hamas war. We're tired. We've been fighting for 20 months. We want it to end. We want the hostages home. No Israeli feels we should not be attacking Iran. The unity, the strength, and almost the pride that we feel in carrying out this effective war, when it comes to being able to run a war that is effective, strategic, not killing a lot of civilians, but truly, hopefully removing a threat that is very real. Israelis are stand behind it. We're resilient. And I think that you're going to see that not only will we make it through this war, but God willing, it will have the impact that we need. So I think with that, I would open it up to questions.
Maayan, thank you for that and for those insights. There are a number of questions that have come through. You have touched on some of these, so I'll ask them again because you might just want to provide a little bit more detail or context. So One of the questions refers to the countries of North Korea, China, Russia. Where are they at in all of this? We hear lots of speeches and comments. So just any further insight into where you think they may go from here?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest threat that we're seeing, right, is that some of these countries want to restock Iran and allow Iran to continue this war against Israeli civilians. I'm not an expert in diplomacy, international diplomacy, when it comes to Russia, China, and North Korea. What I do know is that Iran had signed a deal very closely to when we carried out our preemptive strike, really one of them with China in the last week, which was to be able to increase its ballistic missile stocks. Iran actually is a big exporter of weapons as much as it is an importer of weapons. It creates a lot of weapons, and it has been supporting the Russia-Ukraine war. It's very close with Russia, and so it expects to see Russia supporting it in this endeavor. And U.S. President Donald Trump had said that Putin had been in touch with him. They're vying to get some kind of ceasefire right away, of course, Russia. But where that goes, I honestly, I don't know. But I do know that it is, when I say that it is a battle not only between Israel and Iran, the reason I say that is for that exact reason. You have two axes going on, the Western axis and this really dangerous terror axis. And Russia and China are in many ways a part of that. Obviously, North Korea, we know North Korea was a part of the non-proliferation treaty, of course, for nuclear weapons, broke the treaty and then withdrew. And so we know where they stand on that principle.
Great, thank you for that. And speaking of others in the region and maybe the unspoken conversations, one of the other questions here regards the other Arab countries. We know that they have been involved previously with helping to destroy missiles on their way to Israel. Does anyone believe that there are actual conversations going on behind the scenes between the other Arab countries and Israel? And to what extent, perhaps?
100%. So this is something that, I talk a lot about. First of all, the Abraham Accords have held throughout this entire Hamas war. And I think they're the seven front war. And I think that's very important before we even get into what's happening today, to understand. We signed in 2020 with the United Arab Emirates, shortly thereafter, right, Morocco, Bahrain, and Sudan. And we've had a lot of discussions with Saudi Arabia that are still ongoing, despite some of what you see in the media, which is, of course, the idea that there must be a Palestinian state before it's signed, or what will that pathway look like? And it hasn't been signed yet, of course. But Israel is working very closely with its Arab partners throughout all of this. And one of the ways you know that is you can look at the economic side of things. We increased trade dramatically from 2020 until this war happened in 2023 with those Arab partners. And by and large, while tourism dropped, trade did not, meaning that those business partnerships were still holding. In addition, what you saw, while the Arab countries didn't come out against the Palestinians, they also were very, very careful, even shortly after October 7th and going forward, the ones who are our allies, in whether or not they condemned Israel, right? The language that they used to do it when there was something that they felt was maybe not done in the best possible way in Gaza or otherwise. It's been you didn't see the breakoffs that you would have expected to see. So first of all, the fact that held really, this entire time should tell you something right there. In addition, we know for sure that Israel is working very closely with these neighbors when it comes to Iran. Why do we know that? Remember, the reason the Abraham Accords were signed, beyond the peace and prosperity concept and the economic side, was to stop Iran. Israel was seen as the only player in the Middle East that could for sure manage Iran. And so all of these Arab countries, Iran has sent proxies to attack them. The Houthis, remember, before October 7th, were attacking the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, right? This isn't, Iran is against the moderate Arab countries as well as it is against Israel. Just Israel is more of an enemy, right? Or the United States is more of an enemy. But Iran is a rogue regime who doesn't want to see peace in the region. And these countries are nervous. Saudi Arabia has been very fearful, for example, that if there were attacks on Iranian oil depots, that they would then retaliate by attacking Saudi Arabia's. And so, this is a very real phenomenon in the region. And not most conversations about security at this stage, or obviously with these partners, are not happening overtly, meaning you're not necessarily reading about them. But from what I understand from many sources tied to the defense establishment, they are certainly ongoing, and they have been helpful in ensuring that we're able to stop the ballistic missiles. Remember, they're different systems, the Arrow system versus like the Iron Dome. So one of the reasons you're seeing more missiles get in isn't for lack of people trying to stop them, but because they're, again, a much stronger missile. They move much faster, and the Arrow system has a different track record. We're working now with Arrow 3. That's the newest Arrow system we have out. Soon will be Arrow 4. But the Iron Dome that you see for those Hamas and Hezbollah missiles is just a different system.
So I think from that, there might be greater support than we think, but certainly a lot of them are not outwardly spoken in their support for obvious reasons. In terms of Iran's proxies in the area, be it Hamas, Hezbollah, we know Lebanese government came out with a statement about Hezbollah's involvement. Where do you think, and I guess more acutely, Gaza itself, where that might sit in all of this and in the weeks that follow from now or months?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I have to say that one of the biggest challenges of the Iran-Israel war that's going on right now is that Gaza has sort of fallen from the headlines. People aren't talking about it anymore, and we still have over 50 hostages sitting in Gaza. The IDF is continuing its operations in Gaza. You're just not reading about them as much. And the goal is still the same. We went back and started fighting and adding more force in March. In Israel, it's divided as to whether or not people believe or don't believe that we should be doing that when the hostages are still there. But one thing that I will say is you have to remember that of the hostages, there's about 55, I want to say now, that are still 54, 55 that are still in Gaza. Only around 20 were alive, which mean the rest were bodies. And when we started in March, there were 59, and we've rescued those other bodies. So we are actually bringing the hostages home through this war, though people are not necessarily like remembering or looking at that, because the question was, would the force help to get a ceasefire deal or not help to get a ceasefire deal? Hamas is not going to be signing a ceasefire deal anytime soon, because the only leverage that Hamas has right now are those hostages. I don't even know, and we don't even know if they are all really in Hamas's possession, if we can get all the bodies back. The alive ones, I think we do know. But every time we got close, including a couple of days before this outbreak with Iran, Hamas was saying, oh yes, we're ready to sign to stop the war. Israel was saying, okay, we'll stop the war and take the hostages. And then in the final hour, they would say, oh, nope, there's something wrong with the agreement. We're not going to sign. And then the war would continue. So that looks like the camp. Again, I'm not going to give an opinion, but there's two camps here, right? And how we continue. We occupy right now around 70% of the Gaza Strip, military occupation, not people, obviously. And the idea is that they're going to be there not for 3 months or 6 months, but could even be years. The biggest change that happened in Gaza shortly before this was the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is now providing the aid inside Gaza and removing that power from Hamas. Now, you saw just recently some people were killed again outside the aid centers, and then that Hamas blames Israel, and then Israel says, no, it's Hamas. And you're going to see that go back and forth, but it's all really rhetoric. The Hamas-run health ministry, and I want to stress that, loves to put out the numbers and the attacks that are happening from their perspective. This is a terrorist organization. Unfortunately, international media sometimes forgets that. But generally speaking, once an investigation is done, not always, because sometimes Israel is wrong, but generally speaking, Israel is not the one perpetrating these kinds of attacks, or there are terrorists that are being killed, and then we can prove that. We're just a little bit more methodical and slower, not always good, in order to get to those facts. But I think the war in Gaza is going to continue as planned. As I mentioned, Ron Dermer gave an interview yesterday, and he said we are getting closer to achieving our goals with Iran. I'm hearing, but I say this with a grain of salt, because you hear through different experts say different things, but in the end a lot changes on the ground. But they're saying that maybe within the next week or so we will be done with whatever we wanted to do in Iran, and that will stop, and then we will start to hear again about Gaza. Gaza didn't go away. Gaza really hasn't changed much actually in the last 5 days. You're just not hearing so much about it.
Great, thank you. You made reference to what we hear and what we don't hear in the news, certainly around the world and here in Australia. It is a whole nother webinar. We can't answer that now because we wish you mentioned, yes, there are errors, but of course that's all that we generally hear about, not everything else. But as I said, that's an entirely different discussion and one we're not going to resolve here. I guess coming more, internally, we've discussed proxies and those countries around. One of the questions here is about the likelihood or any possibility of a regime change in Iran. Of course, we do see things on the news about protests and those bold enough to speak out. Where do you think that sits at all, and is it any realistic possibility that could change?
So for the first thing is Israel did not go into the war, Israel itself, for regime change. It's made that very clear, although Israel, of course, would like regime change as much as anybody else, but that is not our goal of the war. Whether or not there will be regime change is a big question mark. And I say this because there are always there are two sides, right? That's part of the way that the world works, and people should probably always remember this. Usually there's some gray in the middle and nothing is black and white. But certainly the pressure and the force that is being placed on Iran right now, we have seen it in the past. The people can rise up. Regime change will come from the inside if we are beginning to target to where, they aren't letting their people. You saw the cars backed up in Tehran, right? And all the videos, people can't escape. They feel unsafe. This could lead to the internal pressure that would then eventually overthrow the regime. On the other hand, there is a patriotism that is happening because Iran is getting attacked. And many people, from what I understand, who are very against the Iranian government are feeling very for the Iranian state, and therefore are less likely to right now go against the regime. But I will say that the people that are close with Israel, and I work with a woman named Emily Schrader, who you might be familiar with. She's one of our anchors, and she's been covering Iran for a very long time. And she was saying that the core group that she works with, right, of what like the Iranian rebels, that she's been the women especially, that she is hearing a lot of rumblings and a lot of desire to rise up. But I think it's kind of a watch and wait situation, because right now we're in the middle of the strikes, and it's not going to happen while that's happening. But will it be something that reverberates? I think that's everybody's hope, right? But again, it will have to happen from inside it. Israel cannot bring about regime change in Iran.
Maayan, you mentioned people leaving, people being concerned for their own safety and security. One of the questions here is regards perhaps a more technical question about when one takes out, destroys a nuclear facility, what is literally the fallout? Do we even know what that means, what that looks like? How does one even go about it? And discussions around that.
All of the nuclear facilities are a little bit different. They're mostly underground in Iran, but also, as I mentioned, they work with nuclear centrifuges. They are not, it's not like if we take out a nuclear facility, the nuclear power is like spreading around Iran. That's not happening. So that, just to allay anybody's fears if they think that's what's going on, that's not what it means. They're taking out the infrastructure, okay? And because of the way that Iran's is built, which again is different than some of the other ones that we've taken out in the past, that is not a fear, okay, of like some kind of nuclear leakage or something. We don't even know, remember, in fact, we're relatively certain Iran hasn't actually fully enriched the uranium to weapons grade, so you're not going to see these kind of things going on. The way that we attack the facilities depends on the facility. I mentioned Bordeaux, right? And the reason that we can't do it on our own is we don't have a bomb that is strong enough to get as far underground as is necessary to destroy that infrastructure. The fear is that we do damage and we don't actually take out the program, in which case, because it is a program that is more about how to enrich the uranium and put it onto a warhead and less about a reactor, then you will not necessarily destroy the program, right? Like setting back infrastructure is important, but it's not going to destroy their nuclear program. We have to be able to literally like annihilate all aspects of it and kill the majority of the scientists that would be easily able to build these weapons. Because otherwise, if we have, you mentioned Russia, China, North Korea, if you have the ability to get access to the tools you need and you have the knowledge to remake them, it could still happen very quickly. And so we have to make sure that whatever we do, that it is going to be, as I mentioned, either long-term effective enough, let's say a decade back, so that there could be a deal signed and that something could stop them completely. Regime change might then come about, and there would be things in place to keep us safe. Or we need to figure out a way to really get the actual program demolished, and that is much more challenging because it is so far underground, it is so geographically widespread, and it is a knowledge-based program. So the answer is that when we attack, no, we are not like causing a nuclear war or something like that, but not necessarily are we also as effective as we want to be. And so that's really, from what I understand, the challenge there.
Which I guess makes sense in terms of dismantling the program and the intelligence around it, which is why certain scientists and those far up the knowledge tree have been targeted as part of the
Exactly.
destruction of the program versus destruction of infrastructure, which
Exactly.
speaks to that. There is a question here regards Qatar that, according to another media outlet, and maybe not yours, that there was apparently Qatar was notified of the preemptive strike, and if so, why would that possibly have occurred? What would have been the upside, a trust factor? Is there any truth to it?
I don't know. I read that as well, but I have no knowledge of, whether Qatar was told or not told. I also read it in the media like you did. I do know that what has been confirmed is that Iran has reached out to both Oman and Qatar in order to try to get them to help get a ceasefire agreement and to get the attacks to stop. Saudi Arabia is also involved in that. But in terms of before we attacked, if I don't know why we would tell Qatar, to be totally honest, but I don't know if it's true or not true.
Okay, great. We mentioned before Gaza. One of the other questions actually refers to the West Bank and just what may or may not be happening there, because again, it seems to have disappeared mostly from the news. Any insights you can provide there, both strategically or just in terms of activity?
What do you mean, like in terms of what we're doing in
Of what
Gaza
might
right
be
now?
happening in the West Bank? Yeah, is there current
In the
operations
West Bank,
underway? Again, we don't hear much. And from a
sure.
security
So there
point of
were
view.
It's a great question. So we've been operating in the West Bank mostly for the last 6 months. Actually, Jenin, Shechem, some of the areas where there are larger terror cells, they're very targeted operations. We go in, we go out. We're not, carrying out any kind of larger scale operations. There are still terror cells. The West Bank, though, has been strikingly contained since October 7th. We had a very big fear that we would see that. It's still a front, but it has not been nearly the front that we thought it would be. I was actually just in Nablus about a month ago, and I met with, the head of the refugee camps, and I met the mayor and the governor, and they feel that they're not carrying out a lot of terror. The IDF will say there is a lot of terror, but mostly it's quiet, and we go in and we take care of, the terrorists here or the person planning an attack there, and then we leave. Those are areas that we stopped allowing Palestinians on October 7th, I guess. Really, we made the formal decision a little bit later, but Palestinians haven't been in the country working from those areas since the war started. And there was a very big fear that the economic deprivation that we're seeing, and that is very real, in those areas would lead to an uprising among the people in the territories. But strikingly, 20 months later, you're not seeing that but the people, it is bad. I mean, I will tell you, and as somebody who works for an Israeli outlet, that I really believe in telling the truth. And again, everything is not black and white. There's always gray, and you really do need to acknowledge what's going on all sides. And in the Palestinian territories, there is tremendous devastation, economic deprivation, and because, for good reason, we do have to have a number of new checkpoints that have been in place for the last 20 months. And whenever we try to move them, we see then there's potential escalation. So we've kept them. It's very challenging to travel in those areas for Palestinians. They aren't able to get back and forth to their communities, which means, like, just like we're saying, like now we have to shut down the airports, and so no tourists are coming in. So it's already just a week of that tremendously impacts the GDP and the, what's going to be economically here. The same thing is happening. I go to Bethlehem at least twice a year just for Christmas and for other things, just to go and interview people. And I mean, this year when I went on Christmas, which is now, 6 months ago, but I mean, it's just gotten worse than it was, a few months before, that nobody can really come in. And so these people are really suffering. But from a terror standpoint, the IDF has it super under control. I just wrote an article about this like 2 weeks ago, actually, how only 2% of the attacks are basically getting through. You're seeing almost nothing. There are people that want to carry out attacks. It's not like there are terror entities, but they're just being managed really well. And there is an understanding between the Palestinian Authority, as weak as it is, in Israel. They are actually still collaborating really well, despite what you see in the headlines. That's what I'm told when I go in or when I meet with IDF officials, on the ground there, that there's much more collaboration than what you see in the press.
Great, thank you. Last couple of questions here. I'm also conscious of time and your time. This might be a technical question if you're in a position to answer, but I guess we're all, concerned. The question here regards dirty bombs, other than those that are just the ballistic missiles, even if they're not nuclear bombs. Is that something that is discussed, talked about, a reality, which may contain radioactive material, but not necessarily a nuclear bomb?
There's definitely been discussion about it, but in terms of, is that what we're talking about day to day? It's not been the big discussion here. It's been sort of like lines dropped here and there, like, oh, it could be worse than ballistic missiles. But I think the real fear right now is the ballistic missiles, and that's what people are paying the most attention to.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. And the final question, which is actually a good segue into some concluding thoughts here, but one of the questions was, with what is occurring, we hear on the news that there is not or inadequate amount of bomb shelters and protective spaces for many people in Israel, especially in older buildings. And so I'm not going to ask you to confirm, but I do think it's a segue into sort of concluding this webinar, which is, of course, before I answer that question and how it's being addressed, is to thank you for your insights. I'm sure there's a deep collective appreciation for everyone that has been online and has heard you and listened to what you have to say. We do have another webinar for those online this coming Monday with Elon Ben David, security expert, who's going to help us unpack a little bit more about the current situation, and you will receive an invitation in the coming days. So Maayan, really on behalf of all of us, the conclusion is our continued prayers for peaceful days, and also a commitment from here, from us at JNF, is that we will continue to support Israel as we always have. And referencing one of the last questions regarding bomb shelters, we've just launched our Israel in Crisis emergency appeal, really raising funds for three key areas, which is the needs of the communities in general, the construction and fortification of shelters and protected spaces, and of course, continuing on all the work that we have done on-ground resilience and trauma therapy, mental health programs. And just know that the support that you all provide, it saves lives now, it saves lives in the future. And I think the final message I'd like to give, and Maayan, I think many of us feel this, speaking to you and others in Israel, is we are here to help Israel rebuild. We genuinely hope and believe that she will flourish post-war. And we must remain steadfast in this belief that peace will return, we will prevail. And as I say many times, our greatest strength will come from the strength within. So again, our thanks to you, our deep appreciation to all of you online, wishing you a Laila Tov and Am Yisrael Chai, and Maayan, if there's anything you want to say in conclusion.
Sure. So, Jerome, first of all, it's hard to follow what you just said. I do want to answer the bomb shelter question,
sure,
because
no
actually it just happened to be that this morning I was doing an interview on something related, and I pulled up the state comptroller report on that. So I do have the numbers for you, which was that in 2020, the comptroller published a report that found that close to 2.6 million residents were living without adequate protection. So that's out of our 10 million residents. So, that is quite a number. And the work that you do at JNF, by the way, in terms of putting shelters in protected areas, rebuilding back in the north and in the south, specifically in those periphery areas where they tend to lack more, is actually life-saving and extremely important. And on behalf of all of Israel, I would say thank you. I mean, I've seen them, I've been up there, and it's extremely, extremely important work. I will say as a concluding thoughts that I think that this is a time of a lot of hope. We've been fighting for 20 months on all these fronts, and I mentioned that how we're starting to notice the fruits of those labors. It is intense and it is hard to be able to fight a war for this long. We have lost so many lives, the hostages who have suffered, and some of them who are still there. As a mother, I have 5 children, and the questions that I get, or even my own 8-year-old who, whenever she hears a siren, like, burst so fast to that bomb shelter and is so terrified, of that siren, even still today. And, it is a very difficult situation. They're saying anywhere between 1 million and 3 million Israelis will be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder by the time that this is over. And of course, other symptoms of trauma. It is difficult, but it is an incredibly hopeful time. And I think you really hit on it when you said, it's about giving support. I mean, it's two-way support. I think that Israel should be doing as much as it can to help the Jews of the diaspora. Australia is a perfect example where there's been an uncanny spike in anti-Semitism from what I read. And, I've been hoping not hoping to see that, but hoping to learn more when I was on the ground. But it's happened, to the entire Jewish world as a result of October 7th. But every time that Israel or the Jewish people get knocked down, we don't just get up, we get up stronger. And I really believe that that's what's going to happen, whether we're talking from, I'll give you this, the last thing I say, that the part of my worldview is dealing with health and science. And there's a new field that I myself am calling trauma tech. It doesn't actually have that name, but we are, for the first time, investing. We did a mapping of mental health technology. We have a tremendous investment in R&D and how to help people deal with trauma because of what has happened to us here. And now once we get it down here, we'll export it to the world, and it'll be a silver lining of the last 20 or whatever it will be months of this war. Every time when we build back in the North and the South, we're building back sustainable. We're building back with more green space. We're using urban planning. In Kiryat Shmona in the north, where if you go there, there are huge craters in the ground from these Hezbollah rockets. We're fixing the roads. We're expanding them. We're making it better. So, it doesn't take away from the pain of what we've gone through. But I do believe that, like, next time we talk, please God, we'll be in a much better place. And I just really thank you so much for hosting me today and for letting me share my story. And let's just keep following each other and hope for better times.
Maayan, I'm glad we're recording this, because what you've just said there speaks so true to what we do at JNF, and you've said it so much better than I think I ever could. So I appreciate those sentiments. If you don't mind, I might seek your permission to steal some of those lines. But truly, that is here what we do to build back stronger, better than ever. We see and we hope that there will be a wonderful, as I mentioned before, we will flourish after this passes, and it will. And again, there is a link in the chat for anyone who wants to go on to support these efforts. So again, as I said before, Laila Tov, and may we see peaceful times.
Thank you.
Okay, you take care. Bye-bye.